There are certain mornings you remember not for what they bring, but for what they take away. That morning in Bright Grove Hills was one of them. Lucas Miller, former entrepreneur, semi-retired investor, and lover of quiet mornings, woke up to a silence so deep it felt unnatural. Not the peaceful stillness of dawn, but the kind that makes your instincts whisper something is wrong. No soft glimmer of reflections from his backyard pool danced on the ceiling. No subtle hum of the water filter. Just dry, eerie quiet. Slippers on, coffee forgotten, Lucas stepped outside, still wearing the faded t-shirt he'd slept in. And there it was. Or rather, wasn't. His pool, his pride, his summer sanctuary, his $150,000 backyard oasis was bone dry. A pit of white concrete baking under the morning sun. Even the inflatable flamingo lay collapsed like it had given up on life itself. But the true absurdity was still ahead. Standing along the property line, arms crossed with theatrical self-importance, were 5 members of the Bright Grove Homeowners Association. In front of them, like a Broadway villain ready to take her bow, stood Marjorie Sutton, clad in pressed khakis, oversized sunglasses, and a permanent smirk that could make a saint curse. Marjorie held a clipboard like it was the scepter of suburban justice. Lucas blinked, his mind struggling to compute what his eyes were reporting. She called out before he could say a word, voice dripping with honey-coated condescension. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Lovely day, isn't it?" He said nothing. Instead, he walked past his wilting gardenias and retrieved the bright yellow envelope now poking like a warning flare from his mailbox. HOA violation #317B. Unauthorized water waste. Effective immediately. Fine, $3,200. Action taken. Pool drained for noncompliance. Lucas chuckled dryly, a sound more bitter than amused. His water bill was paid through the next quarter. His filtration system used less water than most car washes. And yet here he was, standing over what looked like a bomb crater in his own backyard. Marjorie offered no apology. Only a raise of her eyebrows as if she were the adult in the room dealing with a particularly petulant child. "We must all make sacrifices, Lucas," she said. "The HOA has declared a drought emergency." Lucas pointed toward the pristine, always verdant golf course 3 streets away. The sprinklers were already hissing in rhythm like a symphony of waste. "Oh, but those are decorative essentials," she replied, adjusting her sunglasses. "People come here expecting a certain aesthetic." He said nothing more. Not then. Because Lucas was remembering something. Something every member of the HOA, especially Marjorie Sutton, had failed to notice. The developers of Bright Grove Hills had never sold the water rights to the city. Instead, they'd sold them to a private investor. Lucas Miller. 20 years ago, he'd acquired them as part of a silent investment portfolio. No one in the neighborhood had ever bothered to check the fine print. The HOA had assumed, wrongly, that the city controlled water access. Lucas turned, not angry, not shouting, but calm in the way a storm front gathers in silence. That night, he reviewed the contracts. The easements. The terms of service buried in the Bright Grove Hills charter. Then, with a single call the next morning, he shut the whole system down. At first, no one noticed. The sprinklers sputtered gently, like an old man clearing his throat. A few faucets coughed before falling silent. One woman watering her hibiscus blamed the nozzle. Another man cursed at his broken irrigation timer. But by noon, the truth came crashing down like July's sun on blacktop. Water was gone. Across Bright Grove Hills, showers stopped mid-rinse. Dishwashers choked on dry pipes. The ornamental fountain in front of the community center gurgled and died, a final burp of defeat. And Marjorie? She emerged from her home in a leopard print robe, barefoot and snarling into her phone. Her eyes scanned the neighborhood like a general watching a battlefield slip from her control. Lucas watched from his porch, coffee in hand. Pool still dry, but his spirit far from empty. Because sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with a bang. Sometimes, it's a slow, hissing silence. One drop at a time. By 7:30 a.m., Bright Grove Hills had entered what could only be described as a suburban state of emergency. Residents emerged from their homes like startled ants, coffee mugs in hand, robes flapping in the breeze, confused and disoriented by the most unexpected enemy of all, dry faucets. Hoses hissed uselessly. Toilets failed to refill. One unfortunate jogger was caught mid-shower, hair still lathered in citrus-scented shampoo, screaming out from his driveway, "What is happening?" And Marjorie Sutton, she was unraveling. Lucas observed from a shaded corner of his porch, expression unreadable behind a pair of mirrored sunglasses. He didn't need to orchestrate chaos. It had its own rhythm, and it was playing perfectly. Marjorie had set herself up as the unyielding architect of order in this meticulously curated community. For years, she had passed judgment from her clipboard like a suburban Caesar, wielding fines, citations, and polite reminders with surgical precision. But now, her empire was cracking. She stormed into the HOA headquarters, a repurposed former dental office that still smelled faintly of fluoride, and began barking orders at the other board members, most of whom had shown up in mismatched pajamas and haunted eyes. Lucas didn't need to eavesdrop. He knew the script. She would demand answers, demand control, demand that someone call the city and fix this. And someone would. And that someone would be told the truth. The city didn't own the water rights to Bright Grove Hills. They never had. By 8 a.m., a small crowd had gathered in front of the HOA office. It started with a few confused neighbors seeking answers and quickly swelled into a wave of frustrated homeowners looking for accountability. Lucas decided to join them, not as the orchestrator, but as a participant. Another face in the crowd. Marjorie spotted him instantly. Her eyes narrowed like twin daggers behind her designer lenses. "Lucas," she hissed. "Do you know what's going on?" He shrugged. "No clue. But I'm sure the HOA has it under control, right?" There it was, the first ripple. A whisper in the crowd. A subtle shift. People turning their heads, starting to connect dots. Lucas' tone, too calm. Marjorie's face, too tense. The smug queen bee wasn't buzzing today. One woman, clutching her toddler's empty sippy cup like a broken promise, narrowed her eyes. "I thought we were supposed to conserve water," she said loudly. "Isn't this what the HOA wanted?" Marjorie opened her mouth to respond, but Lucas cut in. "Curious thing about water," he said thoughtfully, "when you don't understand where it comes from, it has a way of disappearing." More whispers. More heads turning. Marjorie looked like a cat being backed into a corner, still dangerous, but increasingly desperate. Then, her assistant, an underpaid college student who usually handled newsletter layouts and typo corrections, stepped out of the office, pale as paper. "The city says, they don't manage our water," he stammered. Dead silence. You could hear a pine cone hit the sidewalk. Marjorie's voice dropped several octaves. "What?" The assistant swallowed hard. "They said the water rights belonged to a private entity. Some investor from years ago. They weren't sure who." Lucas didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The moment hung like humidity in August, heavy, unavoidable, clinging to every pair of widened eyes. He took a slow step forward and let the truth land without drama, without flourish. Just fact. "It's me." A single sentence, and the balance of power shifted. Like a seesaw, slowly but unmistakably tilting. "I own the rights," he said, hands in his pockets. "Bought them before the first house was even built. It was just another long-term asset back then. Until you drained my pool." Marjorie's voice cracked like thin ice. You can't do this." Lucas finally smiled. "Oh, but I already did." She lunged toward him, fury outweighing logic. "This is blackmail. You're holding the neighborhood hostage." "No," he replied calmly. "I'm offering an alternative." Behind him, heads nodded. A few residents crossed their arms. Others, those who had been fined for mailbox paint colors or improper curtain linings, were smiling for the first time in years. "I'll sell water," Lucas continued, "directly to residents. Fairly. Transparently. No HOA markups. No ridiculous policies. Just water." The applause didn't come all at once. It started with a single golf clap from someone in gym shorts and Crocs. Then another. And another. Within seconds, it wasn't applause. It was approval. And Marjorie, for the first time, was left standing alone in a sea of discontent, her empire dissolving, not with a bang, but with a whisper of unity. She turned sharply and stormed back into the HOA office. The door slammed with a metallic thud. Lucas didn't chase her. He simply turned to the crowd and said, "Give it a week. You'll never need them again." They believed him. And somewhere inside that crumbling HOA headquarters, Marjorie Sutton was beginning to understand what Lucas Miller had always known. Power is like water. It flows to those who own it. Marjorie Sutton did not believe in losing. She believed in escalation. And so, while the rest of Bright Grove Hills sipped their bottled water and discussed how to register for Lucas Miller's private distribution plan, she was inside the HOA office, pacing like a general without a map. The room, once her throne room of laminated spreadsheets and committee agendas, had turned cold and quiet. Even the plastic fern in the corner looked like it had given up. The board members, once loyal or at least obedient, sat silently, eyes flicking between one another like middle schoolers waiting to be called on in class. No one wanted to be the first to say it, but they were all thinking the same thing. We're losing control. Marjorie, of course, refused to admit this. Instead, she launched into a flurry of late-night emails titled things like emergency strategy session, immediate action required, and legal countermeasures against private utility monopolies. None of it mattered, because the documents Lucas held weren't just dusty paper contracts. They were airtight, legally binding, ironclad. She tried to get the city involved. They laughed. She threatened to sue. No attorney would take her case. She even whispered about contacting a state-level ally she claimed owed her a favor, though most suspected she was bluffing. And so, as Marjorie plotted, Lucas waited. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He knew the nature of pressure. The more you fight it without leverage, the faster you crack. The next morning, Bright Grove Hills looked different. It wasn't just the missing fountain or the dead turf curling at the edges of the HOA's prized walking path. It was the vibe, the shift in posture. Residents walked taller, spoke louder. They gathered in driveways sharing updates, not complaints. Plans. And the word vote was spreading like wildfire. There was a clause buried deep in the HOA bylaws, rarely invoked, mostly forgotten. If a majority of homeowners submitted formal letters of no confidence, the HOA leadership could be dissolved. Marjorie knew this clause. She also knew she had maybe, 3 days before it turned from theory to execution. That evening, she made her move. Around 11:30 p.m., when the neighborhood was sleeping and the only sound was the faint click of sprinklers that no longer worked, Marjorie and 2 board members, still in button-down shirts but clearly shaken, were spotted sneaking through side yards. They carried clipboards, flashlights, and something far more dangerous, desperation. They weren't knocking on doors. They were scanning irrigation boxes, examining connections, looking for a manual override, a city link, anything that would let them bypass Lucas' system. Lucas, of course, had already anticipated this. The systems were secured. Digital locks, remote sensors, backup triggers. But more than that, everyone was watching now. It didn't take long before a neighbor spotted them crouched beside a utility box behind Lot 42. "Hey," he called from his porch. "That city property?" Marjorie froze mid-squat, flashlight beam illuminating her own horrified face. No, she stammered. "Just routine inspection." At midnight, silence. The neighbor raised his phone. The flash went off. Then again. By morning, the pictures were everywhere. Posted to the neighborhood group chat. Attached to angry emails. Printed on flyers taped to mailboxes. Caught in the act, HOA tries to bypass water lockdown. Marjorie tried damage control, but it was like duct taping a geyser. She released a statement calling Lucas' actions hostile and economically coercive. Lucas didn't reply. He didn't have to. The people had already chosen their side. One by one, homeowners submitted their letters. Some dropped them off at the HOA office with grim satisfaction. Others waved them proudly in group meetings. One elderly couple taped theirs to a lawn flamingo and placed it directly outside the HOA door. By Thursday, the vote was tallied. It was over. The Bright Grove Hills Homeowners Association was dissolved by a landslide. And just like that, years of fines, warnings, and threats turned to dust. The decorative fountain was never repaired. The surveillance gate at the front entrance, Marjorie's pride, was opened and left that way. The monthly newsletter, once bloated with regulations and suggested decor themes, vanished. Lucas didn't celebrate. Not publicly. Instead, he sat by his newly refilled pool, iced tea in hand, watching children ride scooters past without helmet citations and someone's uncle barbecue ribs without fear of open flame violations. It was peace. Marjorie lasted 2 more days. On Sunday afternoon, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. No one helped her pack. No one offered goodbye cupcakes. Even the HOA flag she'd proudly flown above her porch was already gone. Lucas was in the backyard when he heard footsteps approach the fence. She didn't speak at first. He waited. "Finally," she said, voice flat, "you planned this." He took a sip of tea. "No," he said simply. "You did." She gave a short laugh, hollow, bitter. "You think you're the hero." Lucas shrugged. "I think I'm done being told what shade of blue my recycling bin should be." She didn't respond. Just stood there for a moment, then turned away. The truck pulled out 15 minutes later, her house now a skeleton of its former self, just another structure, stripped of authority. And just like that, Bright Grove Hills became something it hadn't been in years. Free. For a few golden weeks, Bright Grove Hills lived in what could only be described as a suburban renaissance. Sprinklers ran on timers without permission slips. Driveways hosted impromptu barbecues that ran past sunset. Someone painted their mailbox turquoise, and no one said a word. It was beautiful. Lucas Miller watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. Not as a ruler, not even as a leader, just as a man who had loosened the grip of something oppressive. He didn't want to control the neighborhood. He just wanted people to breathe. But in every revolution, there is always a whisper of return. And that whisper began in the form of a thick manila envelope left at Lucas's door one Friday morning, marked only with a single word: notice. No return address. No postage. Hand-delivered. He opened it cautiously, expecting maybe a leftover HOA complaint or a snide farewell from Marjorie's camp. What he found was worse. Much worse. Inside was a copy of the original Bright Grove Hills Development Charter. Not unusual, Lucas had reviewed this document many times over the years. But someone had annotated it, highlighting a section in red pen that had previously gone unnoticed. Section 14.3, Emergency Municipal Override Clause. Lucas frowned, his fingers tightening slightly around the page. It was a buried clause, written in dense legalese. But its message was clear. If the community's primary utility, defined as electricity, water, or gas, became subject to monopolistic control by a private party for more than 30 consecutive days, the city could intervene, seize control temporarily, and appoint an interim committee of their choosing to restore services and governance. And just like that, Lucas understood. Marjorie hadn't left in shame. She had left a fuse. And it was burning. Because the clause didn't require that residents be unhappy. It didn't require anyone to complain. It only required that the water, Bright Grove's most basic necessity, be under the control of one individual, without competition, for a set period. And Lucas had passed the 30-day mark yesterday. His private water plan had been welcomed with open arms. But it was still, technically, a monopoly. The realization hit like a splash of cold water. If the city invoked the clause, they could override everything. Re-establish the HOA. Install a neutral oversight committee. Possibly even bring Marjorie back as a consultant. Lucas read the bottom of the document. There was a signature. Not Marjorie's. It was a city attorney. The fuse wasn't just burning. It had been delivered, lit, and placed at his doorstep. He needed options. Fast. That evening, Lucas held a private meeting. Not a rally. Not a rebellion. Just 15 of the most respected homeowners in Bright Grove Hills. Teachers. Veterans. A retired judge. The man with the smoker everyone respected because his ribs were legendary. He laid out the document. They listened in stunned silence. Then one woman, Evelyn, mid-60s, sharp as a blade, leaned forward and asked, "What if we don't let it become a monopoly?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "We create a council," she said. "Voluntary. Resident-run. Not a replacement HOA, God no, but a cooperative. People vote on rates. On oversight. You're still in charge of the water, but on paper, it's shared governance." A quiet moment passed. Then Lucas smiled. Not the smile of a man who wanted power. The smile of someone who saw a way to end the game entirely. By Monday, the paperwork was filed. The Bright Grove Water Cooperative was born. Nonprofit. Transparent. One member, one vote. Oversight committee composed of 5 rotating homeowners. Lucas remained the chief distributor, but now, technically, he wasn't alone. And most importantly, it broke the clause. No monopoly. No override. 2 days later, a city official arrived. Clipboard in hand. Ready to investigate the alleged water utility violation. He found Lucas in his backyard, tending to tomato plants. "Mr. Miller," the man said, "we received notice regarding possible monopolistic control of the water supply in this community." Lucas gestured toward a laminated sign staked proudly in his lawn. Bright Grove Water Cooperative, official member. "Care for a copy of the bylaws?" Lucas asked, handing over a folder. The official flipped through the paperwork. Silent. Thorough. Annoyed. Everything appears in order. Lucas nodded. "We thought so." The official left without another word. Marjorie never returned. But Lucas knew she had tried. That even in exile, she had attempted one last quiet coup, through technicalities and loopholes. Through control disguised as bureaucracy. But in the end, it wasn't brute force that stopped her. It was something far simpler. Community. Because once people learn to stand on their own, they don't kneel easily again. Lucas sat back in his chair that evening, a pitcher of sweet tea beside him, watching as the neighborhood lights flicked on one by one. In one yard, kids played tag with water balloons. In another, someone blared a radio playing old country music. No one was fined. No one was shushed. Somewhere, beneath the lawn chairs and flower beds, the battle had been fought. And won. By the people who had once been ruled. Lucas Miller had always believed in quiet endings. Not the kind that came with fireworks or champagne. He'd seen enough of those in his younger days, but the ones that settled like dust after a storm. The kind where things just work. Where nobody notices the silence because everything finally makes sense. It had been 3 months since the HOA dissolved. 3 months of freedom. Of tomato gardens unregulated. Of mailboxes repainted, flags flown proudly, porches reclaimed by the people who owned them. And Bright Grove Hills? It hadn't fallen apart. It had flourished. Lucas, for the most part, had stepped back. The Bright Grove Water Cooperative was running smoothly. Evelyn chaired the oversight board now, and a rotation of residents handled the financials, maintenance schedules, and rate proposals. No fines. No warnings. Just fairness. He could have kept running it himself. Could have stayed in the spotlight. But that was never the point. He didn't want power. He wanted freedom for himself, and for the people who had never realized how much of it they'd lost. And yet, not everyone understood. Some still wondered, why did he have the water rights in the first place? Why did a man who never attended HOA meetings end up with the neighborhood in his hands? They didn't know the full story. Not yet. So, one warm Sunday evening, Lucas did something he rarely did. He called a meeting. Not mandatory. No agenda. Just an open invite on the community board. Lucas has something to share. Come if you'd like. Bring a chair. They came. Not all of them. But enough. They gathered in his backyard, where the pool once stood dry and defiant but now shimmered peacefully under string lights. Children chased fireflies. Someone brought lemonade. A couple arrived with folding chairs and a Tupperware of brownies. Lucas stood near the edge of the pool, hands in his pockets, a small stack of papers beside him. I'm not one for speeches, he said, voice calm. But I owe you a story. He paused, scanning the crowd. 22 years ago, I wasn't a retiree with too much time on his hands. I was a municipal systems analyst for a private infrastructure firm. My job was to negotiate utility acquisitions between cities and developers. A few eyebrows rose. One of those developers offered me a strange deal: ownership of future water rights in a master plan community that hadn't even broken ground yet. They couldn't pay in full, so they threw in the rights. At the time, it seemed useless. Just paperwork. He held up the original contract, faded and yellowed. I forgot about it. For years. Then I moved here. A quiet murmur. Lucas continued. I watched this place, our home, turn into something cold. Overregulated. Controlled. I watched people live in fear of letters taped to their doors. Of lawn height. Of mailbox colors. He smiled slightly. And then one day, I woke up, and someone had drained my pool. Laughter rippled through the group. Not mocking, just shared memory. I checked the file that afternoon. And there it was. Still valid. Still binding. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't own a contract. He paused. I owned leverage. Silence. I could have sold it. Could have made a fortune. But what good is money if you live surrounded by people who hate where they are? So I used it. And not to rule. To break the rules that never made sense in the first place. He let the words settle. I'm transferring the last of the rights to the cooperative tonight, he said, holding up a notarized packet. I won't be in charge. I'll still pay for water, same as the rest of you. But I'll sleep better knowing it's in your hands, where it should have been all along. Someone clapped. Then another. Soon the whole backyard was echoing with it, not wild, not forced. Just real. Lucas stepped back and nodded. That was enough. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and dusk gave way to stars, Evelyn approached him. You could have kept running things, she said softly. He chuckled. You say that like I wanted to. She smiled. You're a hard man to figure out. Good, he said, tipping his glass. That means I still have some peace left. And with that, Lucas Miller, the man who once lost a pool and took down an empire, sat beneath the glow of porch lights, surrounded by the laughter of free people and the sound of water where it belonged. Not in pipes controlled by power-hungry committees, but flowing freely, with purpose. And peace. 2 years had passed. The sky above Bright Grove Hills was still as blue as ever, the lawns still bloomed in creative disarray, and the sound of children's laughter still echoed between homes that no longer feared warning letters. Lucas Miller, now fully retired, and proudly so, spent most of his mornings tending to the garden. The pool was mostly for aesthetics these days. He liked the way it caught the light, but the tomatoes had become his obsession. People still waved when they saw him, still dropped off pies and homemade jerky. He never asked for it, but they remembered, because you don't forget the man who gave you back your voice. The Bright Grove Water Cooperative had grown far beyond what Lucas imagined. They'd established a website, a digital payment portal, even a quarterly newsletter, though this time it was full of useful tips and jokes, not mandates. And Lucas? He was finally just another resident. Almost. Because some days, quiet days, he still felt it. That hum in the background. The sense that something wasn't done. That somewhere in a distant boardroom, behind glass walls and corporate smiles, the ghost of the HOA was stirring. That feeling became a reality on a Tuesday. It arrived like last time, an envelope. But this one was sleek, clean. A corporate logo embossed in silver, Civic Sphere Solutions. Lucas opened it slowly, eyes narrowing as he scanned the contents. It was a proposal. A new company privately managed, but approved by several local municipalities offering a community lifestyle management partnership. They claimed they could restore order, raise property values, and relieve residents of civic burdens. It wasn't called an HOA, but it was one, in disguise. And the kicker? They had already purchased access rights to 5 neighboring communities. They were surrounding Bright Grove Hills. Lucas set the paper down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the hummingbird feeder swaying gently in the breeze. He wasn't surprised. He knew control never died. It just changed shape. That night, he met with Evelyn and a few others. It wasn't a war council, not yet. But the tone was familiar. Focused. Firm. "This is different," said Raj, the retired judge. "They're private, corporate, and they don't need votes. They just need contracts." Lucas nodded. "We have a cooperative. We have leverage. But we'll need something else now." "Like what?" asked Evelyn. Lucas smiled. "Transparency. Media. Storytelling. If they're coming in quietly, we make noise. They hide behind legalese. We show real people, real impact. We go public. And this time, we're not just protecting our neighborhood." He tapped the envelope with one finger. "We're protecting the idea that neighborhoods can protect themselves." It was then that Lucas made a decision he hadn't planned to revisit. He went into the garage, dusted off an old lockbox, and pulled out a flash drive labeled simply, Phase 0. Inside were years of notes. Infrastructure maps. Bylaw loopholes. Names of legal contacts, media allies, and grassroots networks from his days working in municipal policy. He hadn't thought he'd ever use them again. But the shadows had returned. And this time, they were wearing suits. Weeks later, a podcast titled The HOA Rebellion launched online. In its first episode, a calm, grounded voice told the story of a man who'd once lost a pool and gained a purpose. By episode 3, it had 1 million streams. By episode 5, Civic Sphere Solutions issued a press release claiming it had paused its community integration efforts pending resident review. They never made it past Bright Grove's borders. In the end, Lucas didn't go back to war. He just reminded people how not to lose. Because power always finds a new mask. But if you teach people how to see clearly, how to fight quietly, legally, and collectively, it doesn't matter what name tyranny takes. It won't last. Not here. Not again.